There are places in these mountains that don't appear on any map. Places you can drive past 100 times and never know we're there until you feel it. The air changes, the birds go silent, and suddenly, you know you've stepped into something that doesn't belong to the living. They call them ghost towns, but don't mistake that word for ruins or rubble. These towns breathe, they remember. And in the darkest corners of Appalachia, memory isn't harmless, it feeds. The miners and their families built these towns with bare hands, hauling stone and timber into valleys so steep the sun barely touched them. Then, one by one, the mines closed. Families left, but the ground never forgot the blood and sweat it had swallowed. Folks around here will tell you some places refuse to let go. The doors stay shut, but footsteps still wander the streets. Lanterns swing in mine shafts no one dares enter. And if you look too closely at the windows, you'll see someone looking back. What makes these places terrifying isn't just what you hear in the dark. It's the way the stories line up. Old newspapers, police reports, locals whispering the same name, the same sound, the same light. Different towns, different years, the same fear. And if you think you're safe, because you'll only be watching, don't forget, stories have teeth. They travel. They cling to you. And sometimes, all it takes is hearing them to invite them in. This is Farcical Fears, and tonight we'll descend into 12 of the most chilling ghost towns buried in Appalachia. True accounts, true disappearances, true horrors. If you're ready to open the door with me, then hold on tight, because once you step across, there's no turning back. And before we begin, make sure you subscribe to Farcical Fears, so the next time you feel something watching from the shadows, you'll know where it came from. Let's move to our first story. They call it the Lantern in Black Hollow. A story whispered in miners' bars, passed from old men to younger ones who swore they'd never stepped foot back into those mountains. It begins with a town most people have forgotten, a place that once thrived on coal, but now exists only as a name on yellowing maps. Black Hollow, West Virginia. At its peak, it had 400 families, a church, a one-room schoolhouse, a handful of crooked shops, and the great mouth of the mine that swallowed men every morning and spat them back out by evening, covered in dust. Then, like so many towns in Appalachia, it was abandoned. The coal dried up. The company pulled out. The houses were left to sag and rot until the forest swallowed them. And yet, people say Black Hollow never went quiet. I first heard the story from a man named Everett, who worked in the mine in the 1960s. His voice, when he told it, was low and hoarse, the kind of voice you'd expect from someone who had breathed too much coal dust. He wasn't a man prone to exaggeration. His hands trembled when he held his coffee, and his eyes darted toward the window as though even the memory of that place might follow him home. Everett said the first time he saw the lantern, he thought it belonged to a foreman doing a late inspection. It was a pale light, not quite yellow, not quite white, glowing faintly in the deepest shaft of the mine. He and 2 others saw it. The other men cursed, muttered that someone had forgotten to put out their lamp, and went to fetch it. But when they turned the corner, the tunnel was empty. No light, no footsteps. Just the sound of dripping water. At first it was a curiosity, something the men laughed about in the break room. But then the accidents began. One miner, young, barely 17, followed that strange light deeper into the shaft. He never came back. They found his helmet, cracked, against the rocks, but no body. A week later, another miner vanished the same way. His pickaxe was discovered jammed into the dirt, as though dropped mid-swing. That was when people stopped laughing. Everett swore he never went looking for the lantern, but the lantern came looking for him. He described the way it would appear in the corner of his vision, bobbing gently as though someone were walking just ahead. Sometimes, he said, it would flicker. Sometimes, it would stay steady. And when it came, the air grew colder, the tunnel quieter. Even the rats would vanish. He told me he still dreams about it. He'll be driving down an empty road at night, and in the rearview mirror, there it is, a pale lantern swaying in the dark. The company wrote the disappearances off as accidents. Men went missing in mines all the time. Collapses, gas leaks, falls into hidden shafts. Those mountains were graveyards of careless workers. But the locals had another explanation. They said it was the spirit of Thomas Yates, a foreman who had died 40 years earlier in a collapse. He had been the one carrying the safety lanterns, guiding men deeper into the tunnels the morning the roof gave way. They say Thomas was buried alive, still clutching that lantern, his screams echoing until the earth swallowed him whole. Now, he was still down there, still walking, still luring men into the dark so they could join him. Everett quit the mines not long after his last sighting. He said he couldn't stand the silence anymore, the way it pressed on him like a weight, the way he could feel the light before he saw it. But leaving Black Hollow didn't mean leaving the lantern. The last time I spoke with him, his voice cracked when he described how sometimes on back roads at night, he would glimpse it in the trees, pacing his car, flickering in time with his heartbeat. "It's waiting for me," he whispered. Left the hollow, but the hollow never left me. Black Hollow is empty now. The mine shafts have collapsed, the houses caved in, the church eaten by vines. But those who know, those who dare to pass by, say they've seen it. A faint light bobbing in the dark, moving as though someone were walking just ahead. Always out of reach. Asterisk, some say it's nothing more than swamp gas or tricks of the eye. The mind's way of filling in the void when darkness presses too long against your senses. But the people of Black Hollow never dismissed it so easily. There were too many who claimed to have seen the same pale glow. Too many who whispered about family members who went missing. Too many who swore they'd heard voices calling from the tunnels when no one was inside. One of the last families to leave the hollow carried with them a story about a child, 8 years old, who disappeared one winter's evening while chasing the lantern across a frozen field. His father ran after him, slipping in the snow, screaming his name into the night. Neighbors joined in, carrying torches, combing the woods until their breath burned. But all they ever found were 2 small footprints in the snow that simply stopped. No broken ice, no sign of a fall, no blood. Just a trail that ended in nothing. The boy was never seen again. Over the years, hikers and wanderers have tried to test the legend. They venture into the ruins, armed with flashlights and cameras, daring the lantern to appear. Some come back with shaky voices, swearing that their batteries drained all at once, that their lights dimmed, until only one glow remained, not in their hands, but ahead of them, swaying gently, pulling them deeper into the trees. A few of these explorers uploaded footage, grainy and half-corrupted, the audio warping at the exact moment the glow comes into frame. In each case, the lantern never moves toward them. It waits, it flickers, and it leads. It said the worst thing you can do is follow. Those who resist the urge, who stay rooted in place, survive with nothing more than a story to tell. But those who give in, who step after that strange light, rarely return. And when they do, they are not the same. One man, a drifter, whose name never appeared in the papers, turned up weeks after vanishing in Black Hollow. He was found on a roadside 20 miles away, barefoot, clothes torn, muttering about the man with the lantern. His eyes had gone completely white, pupils burned out as though from staring too long into a flame. He didn't live long after. That, and what little he said, made no sense, just fragments. He walks behind me. He wants company. The tunnels move when he breathes. That is the curse of Black Hollow. To see the lantern is to be tempted. To follow it is to be taken, and to escape it is only to delay the inevitable. Let's move to our second story. They call it the cassette from Jericho. And unlike most tales of ghost towns, this one didn't start decades ago. It began just a few years back, when a group of urban explorers stumbled across the ruins of Jericho, a forgotten fuel stop tucked deep in the Appalachian backroads. Jericho had been empty for decades, a gas station, a handful of houses, and a small diner left to rot after the last coal trucks pulled out of the region. The forest had been reclaiming it for years. Ivy through windows, trees sprouting in parking lots, roofs collapsed inward, like open mouths ready to swallow. The explorers were a small crew, 4 of them, all in their mid-20s, armed with cheap flashlights and GoPros strapped to their chests. Their names don't matter here, because none of them would want to be remembered. What matters is what they found. Inside the gas station, past the broken pumps and shattered glass, there was a counter. On that counter sat a dusty old cassette recorder, the kind with chunky buttons, and a square speaker grill. There was a tape still loaded inside, labeled only with a number 2. They pressed play at first. The tape was only static, the kind of soft hiss you'd expect from an old recording. But beneath the static, faint voices began to rise. Screams, muffled and panicked, overlapping with each other. Then a clearer voice emerged, a man's, shouting, "Don't follow it," before being drowned out by another high-pitched wail. The group froze, listening, horrified but fascinated. One of them laughed nervously, saying it had to be a prank, some old urban legend staged for idiots like them. But another insisted they rewind it. When they did, the laughter in the room stopped. The voices on the tape weren't strangers. They were their own. One by one, the explorers heard themselves screaming on the recording the same tones, the same accents, the same phrases. They used only minutes earlier. It wasn't mimicry. It wasn't coincidence. The tape held their voices, as if it had been waiting for them long before they arrived. They replayed it again and again, the realization setting in like a cold hand around the throat. This tape knew them. At first, they tried to rationalize it. Maybe another group had come here years ago, explorers who just happened to sound like them. Maybe it was a freak recording glitch. Maybe it was a joke left behind by locals. But then the voices changed. The fourth member of the group, the one holding the recorder, rewound the tape, pressed play, and heard himself say something he had not yet said. His own voice, clear and terrified. "It's right behind us." That was when panic set in. They argued about what to do, their voices rising in frantic overlap. But no matter how loud they spoke, their words bled back from the recorder a second later, distorted and delayed, as if the tape was eating them alive, and spitting them back out. Each time one of them shouted, the sound replayed a heartbeat later, warped and desperate, louder than before. Soon they couldn't tell which voice was real, and which belonged to the tape. And then the screaming began again, only this time, it wasn't coming from the recorder. The screams seemed to rise from the walls of the gas station itself, as though the rotting plaster and cracked tiles had been storing them for decades, waiting to be released. The explorers froze, every flashlight beam trembling in the dust-thick air. One of them swore he saw movement at the end of the aisle. Not a person, not even a shape. Just the pale suggestion of something shifting in the corner, as if the shadows themselves were restless. The recorder clicked off on its own. When one of them tried to eject the tape, the button jammed beneath his thumb. But even in silence, they could still hear it. Their own voices, faint, overlapping, leaking from somewhere deeper in the building. A woman's voice, belonging to one of the explorers, echoed from the stockroom behind the counter, though she hadn't spoken at all. Another man's voice called from outside, begging them to leave, though he was standing right beside his friends, trembling. One of them, braver or more foolish than the others, pushed open the door to the stockroom. The smell hit first, old gasoline, mold, something metallic like rust or blood. His flashlight cut through the dark, but the beam bent strangely, as if the shadows were thicker than they should have been. And there, on the far wall, rows of cassette tapes hung on nails, each labeled with numbers scrawled in fading marker. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. The woman who'd heard her voice whispered that she could see her own name written faintly on one of the tapes. Another swore he could hear his father's voice calling from one at the bottom row. Panic rippled through the group. They argued, louder and louder, voices breaking into sobs and curses. But no matter how loudly they spoke, the voices from the tapes always came back first, echoing, twisting their words into screams, sometimes overlapping, sometimes answering, in ways they hadn't yet spoken. That was the moment they understood the truth. The recorder hadn't just captured them. It had predicted them, and somewhere in the shelves of Jericho, their endings were already waiting. The realization hit them like ice water. They weren't in control of anything anymore. Every step they took, every breath, every whispered plea to leave Jericho seemed anticipated, mirrored, and twisted by the tapes. One of the explorers, The youngest stumbled backward, tripping over a broken floorboard. When he scrambled up, he swore he saw himself lying on the floor, staring up at the ceiling with wide, terrified eyes. His own reflection, but wrong. It blinked slowly, deliberately, before vanishing into the shadows. The others screamed, calling his name, but their voices were swallowed by a strange, wet echo that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. The stockroom lights, flickering weakly through the grime, cast long, impossible shadows across the room. The tape seemed to tremble on their nails, vibrating slightly, as though alive. The man holding the recorder pressed play again out of sheer terror, and this time, the voices weren't just imitating them. They were giving instructions. Leave, leave, no, stay, follow. Every tape spoke at once, a chaotic chorus of their own voices, twisted into commands they couldn't obey and couldn't ignore. They ran, blindly, through the collapsing gas station, bumping into broken shelves and fallen signs. The youngest screamed again, vanishing completely this time, leaving only a faint, distorted echo of his last words playing in the recorder. The remaining three were frantic, shouting for each other. But the building seemed to stretch impossibly, corridors elongating, ceilings lowering, until no one could tell which way led outside and which led further into the nightmare. And always, just beyond their vision, a faint glow pulsed the cursed lantern light from the tapes, bouncing from wall to wall, as if guiding them deeper into Jericho's heart, rather than out. Let's move to our third story. I always thought the town of Black Hollow was a story meant for children or drunk old men at the tavern, a place parents whispered about to scare kids into coming home before dark. But when I inherited my grandfather's cabin there, I found the stories didn't even begin to scratch the surface of the truth. Black Hollow isn't just abandoned, it's aware. The first night I woke to the sound of footsteps outside the cabin. I had convinced myself it was an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. But then came the whisper, soft, almost imperceptible, brushing against my ear as I slept. You shouldn't be here. I bolted upright, heart hammering, and for a moment, the moonlight through the cabin window showed the silhouette of a figure standing at the edge of the tree line. But when I blinked, it was gone. Days passed, and the town seemed to shift subtly. Around me, paths I thought I remembered suddenly twisted in impossible ways. Trees that were once at the edge of the property appeared closer, as if they had grown overnight. And sometimes, when I glanced at the empty streets of Black Hollow, I could swear I saw movement, curtains flicking in windows that had no glass, or the distant outline of someone standing at a porch that had long since collapsed. Sleep became impossible. Every night, the whispers grew louder, no longer fleeting murmurs, but half-formed sentences that clawed at the edges of my mind. Leave now. Stay. You can't leave. We see you. The voice wasn't just in my ears anymore. It was inside me, threading through my thoughts, reshaping my perception of reality. I began to question everything. My own reflection in the cabin mirror started to look wrong. The eyes too wide, the smile too tight, the skin pallid in a way that felt unnatural. One evening, I found a journal buried beneath the floorboards of the cabin. The handwriting was my grandfather's, or at least I thought it was, but the entries grew stranger with every page. At first, mundane notes, hunting, repairs, weather. Then, his words turned dark. The town watches. It remembers. If you stay too long, it will rewrite your soul. I laughed nervously at the absurdity. But the more I read, the more I realized the handwriting on the last page was my own. By the third week, I could no longer trust the daylight. Morning arrived, and I felt the same dread I had felt at midnight. The air itself seemed heavier, thick with something unseen, and the forest that bordered the cabin felt like it was leaning in, pressing toward me with every passing hour. I began marking the walls of the cabin, tallying days and scratches, trying to anchor myself. But when I checked in the morning, the marks had shifted or multiplied. Black Hollow doesn't just play tricks on your mind, it consumes the mind. It takes fragments of your memories, the parts of you that are most precious, and twists them into something grotesque. I would wake to find objects moved, chairs overturned, or photographs I had taken of the cabin replaced, with pictures of places I had never seen. Faces stared back at me from the film, familiar and yet impossibly distorted. grinning with a malice I couldn't comprehend. I tried to leave once. Packed the car, drove 4 hours, only to find the roads looping back to the same cabin. The forest around the town seemed to shift with each mile, a maze of gnarled trees and shadowed hollows. And then the whispers, insistent now, pleading, mocking. You can't leave, you never will. Panic overtook me, and I drove in frantic circles until the headlights caught something on the road. A child, pale as moonlight, standing, perfectly still, staring. The child's eyes reflected nothing, and yet, I knew I was being watched. I returned to the cabin, exhausted, resigned. And it was then I noticed the first of the replacements. My grandfather's old rocking chair. In the corner had shifted, facing the wall. Inside the seat's cushion, I found a photograph of myself not recent, not taken by me, but somehow already aged, already altered, as if the town had seen me at some distant point in the future. My own face, hollowed and strange, staring, back with that same too-wide smile. Every night after that, the whispers grew bolder. They spoke my fears aloud, whispered secrets I had never told anyone. And sometimes, when I dared close my eyes, I could feel their touch. Cold fingers brushing my skin, pressing into my skull, threading through my mind. I began to lose track of who I was, whether I existed or was just another memory being folded into Black Hollow. And yet, I couldn't leave. The town had me. It had always had me. I began speaking to it, bargaining in whispers, apologizing for trespassing in a place older than my understanding. But the more I spoke, the more it responded. It taught me things I didn't want to know, showed me visions of other lost souls, twisted and broken, absorbed into the town's memory. I realized then that Black Hollow was not a place of ghosts. It was a living thing, patient, eternal, hungry. Now, I write this in the hope that someone will find it. But the truth is, if you ever come here, even for a moment, the town will see you. It will remember you. And perhaps, one day, it will rewrite you too, folding your existence into its endless. Watching darkness, I can no longer distinguish between my thoughts and the whispers, between my memories and what the town has planted. I can feel it now, breathing with me, inside me, and I know that soon, I will no longer be the one writing. The town will write for me, and it will not stop. The walls of the cabin seemed to pulse now, as if alive, breathing with a rhythm I could feel in my chest. Every night, the whispers became voices, distinct, urgent, almost human in tone. They spoke not only of the town's history, but of me, my childhood, my fears, the secrets I had buried even from myself. It was impossible to tell whether these voices were real or a creation of my own fraying mind. But each word was a knife twisting deeper, leaving me raw and vulnerable. I started seeing shadows that weren't shadows, figures standing at the edges of my vision, dissolving whenever I tried to focus. Sometimes, when the wind howled through the broken windows, I could swear it carried their laughter, low guttural, and filled with a cruel amusement that chilled me to the bone. I stopped keeping track of days. Time had no meaning here. Every hour felt stretched, elongated, folding over itself like the town itself. A living labyrinth designed to disorient and trap me. Food lost its taste. Sleep became an ordeal I could no longer endure without the whispers creeping into my dreams, molding them into endless loops of fear. I would awaken to find my own handwriting scrawled on the walls, in places I had never touched. Phrases like "you belong here" and "we remember" etched in urgency, as if the town itself was trying to communicate directly with me. My reflection in the mirror grew stranger every day. The eyes too wide, the skin too pale, and always that same tight, unnatural smile that no one could wear and live. Then came the night I realized Black Hollow didn't just observe, it acted. I woke too. A faint scratching at the cabin door. At first I thought it was wind or a branch, but the rhythm was deliberate, slow, methodical. I pressed my ear to the wood. A voice whispered from the other side, low and dripping with menace. "We've been waiting for you." My pulse raced as I stepped back, but my legs felt heavy, unresponsive, as if the air itself had thickened, rooting me in place. I could do nothing but watch as the shadows outside stretched toward the cabin. long tendrils of darkness slithering along the walls. Reaching for me, I screamed, but no sound came. My voice, my own existence, seemed to dissolve in the suffocating presence of the town. It was not malicious in the conventional sense. It was patient, ancient, and utterly inevitable. Black Hollow had survived centuries by absorbing those who strayed too close, twisting them, rewriting them, until they became indistinguishable from the memory of the town itself. I don't know how much longer I will remain myself. The whispers speak of my future with certainty, a future that exists only within the town's grasp, a life folded into its endless memory. And yet, a part of me hopes someone will find this journal, this confession, and understand that Black Hollow is not a place to visit, to explore, or to inherit. It is a living prison, and it is patient. It waits, and it remembers everything. Even now, I feel its gaze behind me, a presence pressing against my spine, watching, waiting. I write this knowing it may be the last thing I ever write under my own hand. The town will have its way soon. I am already a part of it, and soon, there will be nothing left of me except whispers on the wind, carried through the hollows of Black Hollow, warning others who dare approach. Let's move to our fourth story. I never thought I'd be one of those people who stumbled into a story that seemed too strange to be real, only to discover that reality had a way of proving the unimaginable true. It all began when I joined a small crew of amateur documentarians interested in abandoned places. Our goal was simple: catalog forgotten towns in Appalachia, gather footage, and tell their stories before they crumbled entirely. None of us expected Blackwater Ridge to be different from the usual ghost towns, until we found the box. The box was tucked in the corner of what appeared to be an old general store, dust and cobwebs coating its surface like a shroud. There was no lock, but the moment I lifted the lid, a cold breeze seemed to escape, brushing my hands with ice. Despite the stifling summer air, inside lay a collection of photographs, brittle and yellowed with age, each depicting townsfolk who looked off. The faces were normal at first glance, but the eyes, something about the eyes, made my skin crawl. They weren't just staring. They were pleading, warning, almost alive in their silent desperation. As we started filming, things began subtly. Our camera caught glimpses of movement in the corners of rooms, but when we reviewed the footage, the frames were empty. Shadows shifted between shots. Equipment malfunctioned in ways that made no technical sense. Microphones picking up whispers that weren't there. Batteries draining impossibly fast, our lights flickering when no power surge occurred. At first we laughed it off. Old wiring, tired cameras, we told ourselves. But as the sun set each day, the feeling of being watched grew unbearable. I took the photographs out of the box one night while everyone else slept. Each image seemed to pulse slightly under the beam of my flashlight, a heartbeat of malevolence I couldn't explain. Then I noticed something horrifying. New figures appearing in the background of the photos. Shapes that hadn't been there before. At first I assumed it was my imagination, the exhaustion of long days and restless nights. But the next morning, when we compared notes, the others had seen them too. Figures cloaked in shadow, faces obscured, always in the periphery, always following. We decided to leave the town, but Blackwater Ridge had other plans. Our van wouldn't start. Tires flat, engine dead, as though the town itself was resisting our departure. That night, the box reappeared at the foot of our tent, despite having been locked in the van hours earlier. And that's when the voices began, clear, distinct, urgent. Whispers of names, our own names, spoken by voices that were neither male nor female, but something in between, something not entirely human. They begged, threatened, laughed. And through the camera, we began to see them. Shadowy figures at the edge of the frame. Faces contorting in ways impossible in real life. Eyes fixated on us, piercing through the lens. Sleep became a luxury we couldn't afford. Each of us took turns watching the footage, each night more disturbing than the last. The recordings started to change themselves. 1 minute of footage would become 20 when reviewed, showing hours of events that had never happened, scenes that none of us remembered filming. Our own actions were distorted. Sometimes I would see myself on the screen, standing perfectly still while a shadow approached from behind. Though I had been elsewhere in reality, we argued, panic rising with every inexplicable event. The box was alive, or cursed, or both. When we tried to destroy it, it reappeared, unscathed, opening itself as though it had a will of its own. And every time it opened, the whispers returned louder, more coherent. "Stay, we need you. You belong here." The line between reality and footage blurred. We could no longer tell if what we were seeing was happening in real life, or only within the cursed frames. Days blurred into nights. One by one, members of our crew disappeared. Not just vanished, erased. On camera, it was as if they had never existed. We reviewed previous recordings, looking for clues, only to find the boxers in places we had no memory of them being, shadows, lurking in corners where none had been before, and the photographs multiplying, now showing us in impossible situations, interacting with the figures we had never met. By the last night, I was alone. I held the box, my hands shaking, whispering apologies into the cold Appalachian wind. The shadows no longer waited. They approached, fluid and merciless. I turned the camera on myself, hoping to record proof, to leave a message for anyone who might come searching after me. And as I pressed record, I realized the final horror. The box, the town. The footage, none of it existed outside of Blackwater Ridge. I was already part of it, already framed in a photograph I had never seen, already in the whispers, already lost. Now, I write this hoping someone will stumble upon it, some future wanderer drawn to the allure of forgotten towns. If you do not touch the box. Do not linger in Blackwater Ridge. Do not make eye contact with the shadows that move just beyond the corner of your vision, because once you notice them, they notice you. Once you record them, they record you, and the town. The town never forgets. Even as I sit here, writing these words, I can feel the presence of the town pressing in from all sides. The air in my temporary shelter is thick, heavy, almost viscous, as though the very atmosphere conspires to trap me. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of wind through the nearby trees, feels deliberate, purposeful, as if the forest itself has a mind, and is orchestrating my torment. I can hear the faintest scratching at the walls, soft enough that I might have ignored it once, but now it grows with each passing hour. Climbing, circling, drawing nearer. I've tried to keep track of time, but the sun and moon no longer follow. The rules I know. One moment it is dusk, the next it is pitch black. My journal entries, which I thought were sequential, are rearranging themselves on the pages, sentences and paragraphs shifting as if written by unseen hands. The whispers have become a language I almost understand, a cadence that hints at old promises, ancient grievances, and the inevitable fate awaiting me. Sometimes, in the corner of my vision, I see my own reflection, distorted, grinning with a mouth that isn't mine, eyes hollowed and accusing. Food has lost its meaning, sleep is a distant memory, and even thoughts of escape feel like illusions. Each attempt to leave the perimeter of Blackwater Ridge is thwarted by forces unseen. Trails I thought I had memorized loop endlessly back to the same clearing. Trees, rocks, and even abandoned buildings seem to move when I'm not looking, subtly, but unmistakably rearranging themselves, keeping me disoriented, feeding my panic. I have begun speaking aloud to myself just to hear a familiar voice, though even that fails to anchor me, and yet, I am compelled to continue recording, writing, documenting. The box, though now locked away in a corner, hums with a quiet energy that pulses through the floorboards. Sometimes I hear it calling my name softly, coaxing me closer, promising understanding, offering the answers I crave. I know better now. To touch it is to surrender entirely. Yet a part of me aches to see what horrors lie within, to know the full extent of Blackwater Ridge's appetite for human lives. The last fragment of sanity I cling to is the hope that these words might survive, that someone, someday, might read them and understand, that they might avoid the fate I am hurtling toward. But deep down, I know it is futile. The town waits patiently. It always waits, and soon it will come for me entirely, dissolving me into its endless memory, leaving nothing but whispers on the wind, and a faint shimmer in the lens of a forgotten camera. Even now, I can feel it moving closer, the shadows stretching across. The walls in shapes that are both familiar and impossibly wrong. Every heartbeat is a countdown. Every breath, a step closer to being consumed. I write this as a warning, but I also write it as a confession. Blackwater Ridge is alive, and I am already part of it. Let's move to our fifth story. I've never shared this story with anyone outside of my closest family, and even now, putting it into words feels like walking barefoot across broken glass. It begins with a dare one that sounded innocent at the time, a challenge whispered among friends during a summer visit to the mountains. We had been driving along back roads deep in Appalachia, chasing rumors of an abandoned settlement called Hollow Pines, a place locals claimed no one should ever enter after dark. The stories were always dismissed as local superstition, but curiosity has a way of eroding reason. That night, armed with nothing more than flashlights, a map, and youthful arrogance, we decided to see it for ourselves. At first, Hollow Pines seemed like any other decayed ghost town. Crumbling homes leaned against one another as if holding each other up, their windows empty, eyes staring into the night. Rusted signs swung silently from the wind, and weeds had claimed the streets in a slow, patient takeover. We laughed nervously, joking about haunted houses and old curses, though the air carried a weight that stifled even our bravest words. There was something about the place that felt alive in its silence, as if the town itself was observing, waiting. I was the first to notice the markings, faint scratches along doorframes, not random decay, but intentional, deliberate. Shapes that resembled symbols I couldn't recognize, etched with care, a language older than any of us could decipher. One building, the remains of what appeared to be a schoolhouse, drew me in more than the others. Its door creaked open under my hand, revealing rows of broken desks and a thick layer of dust disturbed by footprints, small footprints, child-sized, moving across the floor as if someone had recently walked there. My friends argued I was imagining things. I was certain I wasn't. That's when I first heard the humming. A low, persistent sound that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. It wasn't loud, but it penetrated the mind, tugging at the edges of sanity. The more I listened, the more the sound morphed into whispers, faint at first, then words, though I couldn't understand the language. My friends began to panic, insisting we leave, but the town didn't want to let us go. The roads we had come in on seemed longer, twisted differently than we remembered, and the forest surrounding the town felt impossibly dense, pressing in on all sides. Night fell fully, and with it came the shadows. They weren't the ordinary darkness you'd expect. These were shapes that moved with intent. I saw them slip between buildings, stretch across streets, and dissolve into the trees. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks under the pressure of fear. But when my friends vanished one by one, I knew it wasn't. One moment we were together, laughing nervously, and the next, I was alone, my voice swallowed by the town itself. I wandered, desperately calling out for them, but Hollow Pines was merciless. Every turn led me back to the schoolhouse, the whispers growing louder, more coherent, their meaning just out of reach. I began noticing faces in the windows, not reflections of my own, but faces of children, adults, long dead perhaps, staring with hollow eyes, mouths moving in silent warnings. When I tried to leave again, the town resisted. Fallen trees blocked. Paths collapsed, structures appeared where none had stood before, and the ground itself seemed to shift beneath my feet. It was there, in the center of what had once been the town square, that I found the tree. A single, gnarled oak, larger than any I had ever seen, its bark etched with names and dates, many recent. Beneath it lay a small stone altar, upon which rested a journal bound in cracked leather. I picked it up, compelled by a force I couldn't explain, and as I read, I realized it contained the accounts of those who had entered Hollow Pines before me. Every page detailed experiences eerily similar to mine. Whispers, shadows, disappearances. The final pages were blank, but as I turned them, I saw writing appear before my eyes, words that formed in my mind. You are next. Fear became a tangible weight. My body moved on its own, dragging me through the town, toward the schoolhouse again. The shadows coalesced, forming figures I could no longer distinguish as human or not. They surrounded me, their murmurs rising to a crescendo that made my skull ache. I screamed, ran, and tripped over roots that hadn't been there moments before, the altar and the tree fading into the mist. By the time I reached what I thought was the road, dawn was breaking, and the town had vanished. Hollow pines, as far as I could tell, had dissolved back into the forest, leaving only silence and the lingering hum in my mind. I returned home, but the story didn't end there. The whispers followed me, faint at first, now persistent. Shadows twist in the corner of my apartment, and at night, I dream of the gnarled oak, the altar, and faces that plead silently for help. I have tried to warn others, to tell the tale in hushed tones, but most dismiss it as fantasy. The truth is far worse. Hollow Pines is not bound by geography or time. It seeks, it remembers, it waits. And I know, with a certainty that chills my soul, that it will call for me again. Now, I live in constant vigilance. Every creak in the floorboards, every flicker of light, every whisper in the wind reminds me that Hollow Pines has not finished. The memories of my friends lost to that town haunt my dreams, their absence a permanent scar on my conscience. I record everything I can, every sound, every shadow, every inexplicable event, hoping that someday someone will understand, that someday someone will heed the warning. Do not follow the rumors, do not chase the legend. Some towns are meant to be forgotten. Some names are meant to fade. Hollow Pines is not one of them, and yet, here I am, still alive, still haunted, still waiting, because I know the moment I let my guard down, the whispers will call again, and I will be swallowed whole by the town that exists only in the minds of those it has claimed. Even now, as I write these words, I can feel the edges of Hollow Pines pressing into my mind. It's not just a memory anymore. It's a presence that follows me, a subtle weight in the air I breathe, a whisper that slips between my thoughts when I least expect it. Sometimes I catch myself staring at the corners of rooms, imagining the twisted shapes of those shadows, waiting to reappear. I know I am being watched, not just by the town itself, but by whatever lingers in the spaces between its buildings. In the dark hollows beneath its roots, at night, the dreams grow more vivid. I walk the streets of Hollow Pines again, but this time the town shifts around me. Houses stretch impossibly tall, windows leer like gaping mouths, and the forest encroaches with unnatural speed. The tree, that gnarled sentinel, looms above everything, its branches thick and alive, whispering secrets in a language I almost understand. The altar calls to me in my sleep, and I awaken with the scent of damp earth and inked leather, the journal sometimes open beside me. Pages marked with words I didn't write. I have tried to rationalize it, tried to convince myself that it's the trauma, the fear, the guilt of losing my friends that bends my perception. But even in daylight, in the mundane routines of normal life, Hollow Pines leaves its trace. Shadows linger longer than they should, shapes flicker in the periphery of my vision, and the persistent low humcos inside my skull, never fully silenced. Friends and strangers notice the change in me. I flinch at sudden movements, whisper warnings to empty rooms, and jump at sounds that shouldn't be there. I feel a constant pull toward the mountains, toward that cursed place. It's as though Hollow Pines has left a tether between us, an invisible cord of obsession and inevitability. I know, deep down, that no amount of distance, no amount of daylight, will ever fully sever it. The town waits, patient and eternal, and I am tethered to its will. And yet, despite the fear, the knowledge of its danger, there's a compulsion I cannot resist. The journal, the shadows, the whispers they call me, insist I return, as if to complete something unfinished. I have resisted, but I feel the pull strengthening every day. It is a part of me now, just as I am a part of it. The line between observer and prey has blurred, and I suspect that one day I will step into Hollow Pines again, and this time I may never come back. Even now, I feel it in my bones. The town remembers me, the shadows know my name, and the whispers are growing louder, promising that the next time I hear them, the boundary between our worlds will vanish entirely. Let's move to our sixth story. I never intended to get caught up in this. I'm a documentarian by trade, chasing legends, myths, and forgotten histories. But some stories are different. Some places are alive, and Hollow Creek, the forgotten Appalachian settlement, was one of them. I had heard whispers about the town for years. Tales of families who vanished overnight, houses standing for decades untouched, and a strange resonance that local folklore claimed ate the unwary. It was perfect for my next documentary, a deep dive into the hidden corners of America's abandoned places. I brought a small crew, cameras, and all the technical gear one might need for evidence. None of it prepared us for what we found. We arrived at Hollow Creek just as the sun was dipping below the horizon. The air smelled of damp pine and old rot, thick and clinging to our clothes, like a warning. The town was nearly invisible from the main road, concealed by overgrowth, twisted trees, and fog that rolled down the hills like a living entity. At first, everything was eerily quiet. Not the comfortable silence of nature, but the oppressive, unnatural stillness of something watching. We set up our cameras and began recording, narrating our initial impressions, joking nervously to keep morale high. It didn't take long to notice the anomalies. At first, there were subtle faint scratching sounds coming from behind walls, shadows that darted just beyond our line of sight, and windows reflecting movement that had no source. Our sound equipment picked up low-frequency vibrations that weren't consistent with wind or animals, a hum that seemed to follow us wherever we went. I chalked some of it up to the mountains playing tricks on acoustics, but the footage told another story. When we reviewed it later, figures appeared where none should have been. Faces pressed against darkened windows, lingering just long enough for a heartbeat before vanishing. Our first night inside Hollow Creek was the worst. We had set up a small base in the old town hall, a crumbling brick building that had survived decades of neglect. It was supposed to be safe, a place to review footage and plan for the next day. But as darkness settled, the cameras began to malfunction. Lenses fogged, static-filled screens, and we started to hear whispers, almost inaudible at first, then rising into a chorus of unintelligible words. One of our crew members, Mark, swore he saw children walking silently along the hallways, their faces pale, eyes hollow, never blinking, always staring directly at him. By the time I managed to get the camera on him, the hallway was empty, yet his terrified expression said everything we tried to leave. Every exit seemed farther than it should be. Doors leading to hallways that twisted unnaturally, staircases looping back onto themselves. Our GPS devices went haywire, unable to lock onto a signal. Every path through the town seemed to pull us deeper, as though Hollow Creek itself had a mind and was refusing to let us go. Panic set in, arguments erupted, and we realized that documenting this place was no longer a choice, it was survival the next day. I insisted we keep filming, reasoning that footage might explain the impossible. That's when we found the house. Unlike the other structures, this one was pristine, untouched by decay. Curtains fluttered in the non-existent breeze, and the furniture seemed meticulously arranged. There was a diary on the table, and the pages were filled with entries that matched our current experience in eerie detail. Every fear, every sound, every shadow we had encountered was described, down to our names. The final entry was dated the following day, as if time flowed differently inside Hollow Creek. It ended simply with one line: "They are watching." From that moment, our cameras captured things we couldn't explain. Doors opened on their own, shadows moved independently, and the whispers became voices, calling names, taunting, warning. Our crew began to break down. Some refused to continue filming, others insisted we needed more evidence. But we all felt it, the oppressive presence, a living intelligence that hated intrusion. Mark disappeared that night. One moment he was checking a corner, the next, gone, leaving behind only the echo of his scream in the camera's audio. By the third night, I was alone with one camera and a portable recorder. The town had become a maze, shifting with every turn, every step. Buildings seemed to move, streets bent impossibly, and the fog thickened until I could see nothing more than a few feet ahead. Faces appeared in the mist, watching silently, sometimes following, sometimes retreating. Their expressions were blank, yet I felt their emotions: malice, sorrow, rage. I whispered into the recorder, documenting every step, but my voice trembled, betraying the growing realization Hollow Creek did not just want us to leave. It wanted us to stay, to witness, to belong, or perhaps to vanish like all the others. By dawn, I found myself back at the town's edge. The exit finally visible, almost inviting. I stumbled out, recording everything on my camera as proof. Heart hammering, lungs burning. But when I reviewed the footage later, the exit was always there. But faint figures lingered near it, reaching, waiting, smiling. Hollow Creek didn't release its victims, it marked them. Even now, months later, I feel it watching, whispering my name whenever I walk alone. The footage shows it, the shadows, the distorted streets, the faces, but no one believes me. They see only static artifacts of old cameras, nothing more. I tried to warn others. I posted the footage online under anonymous accounts, hoping someone would take it seriously. But people dismissed it as a viral stunt, a clever manipulation. Sometimes I dream of going back, of confronting Hollow Creek, but deep down I know it would consume me entirely. Every time I hear a faint static hum in electronics, I freeze, recognizing its signature. The town is patient, intelligent, alive, and it remembers me now. I keep recording, documenting everything around me in case it finds me again. I speak into cameras at night, whispering warnings, knowing that one day Hollow Creek will call me back. And when it does, I hope this footage will remain as a testament that some towns are not just abandoned, they are sentient, and they are hungry. Even today, in the quiet moments, I hear the whispers from Hollow Creek. They are no longer just in my dreams. They are in the machines, in the hum of electronics, in the air itself. And I know with a certainty that chills my very soul. One day, it will reclaim what it believes is owed. Even now, months after my escape, the presence of Hollow Creek lingers in ways I cannot fully explain. Small things happen. Electronics flicker without cause. Shadows appear in the corner of my vision. And sometimes I hear the faint sound of children laughing or running through my apartment, though I live alone. At first I told myself it was stress, the aftermath of trauma, or even a hyperactive imagination fueled by too much time reviewing the footage. But deep down, I know better. The town never truly lets go. Every night, I feel its gaze pressing through the walls, a cold, living awareness that knows where I am, what I'm doing, and even what I'm thinking. My dreams are filled with streets that twist impossibly, leading me back into Hollow Creek, with figures at every turn, watching silently, waiting for the moment I lose my grip on reality. The diary I found in the pristine house seems to have imprinted itself onto my mind. Sometimes I can recite passages without remembering reading them. It's as if the town has embedded itself into me, marking me as part of its ongoing story. I've tried leaving the area where Hollow Creek is located, driving hundreds of miles away, but the sense of being watched persists. Even my footage, once stored safely, now displays anomalies. I did not record shadows that move independently, figures appearing in frames I didn't point the camera at. It's as though the town continues its work from afar, reaching out through digital space, through memory, through time itself. Despite the terror, I am compelled to document everything, hoping to preserve some evidence before it consumes me completely. Every hum, every shadow, every whisper is meticulously recorded, my hands shaking as I narrate into the camera. I speak not just for myself, but for anyone who might come across this footage, a warning that some places are not just haunted, they are alive, and they remember. Hollow Creek is patient, it waits. And I know, deep down, that no matter where I go, its influence will follow me. A shadow stitched into the fabric of my existence, reminding me that escape is only temporary. The last time I checked my footage, I saw something I cannot unsee, a faint figure standing outside my window, silhouetted in the early morning light, perfectly still, watching. And for the first time, I realized that the story was no longer about the town alone. It was about me, irrevocably part of its history now, and perhaps, one day, it will draw me back into its endless streets, where the whispers never stop and the shadows never rest. Hollow Creek does not forgive, it does not forget, and it does not release what it claims. And as I sit here, recording every detail, I know that someday, somehow, it will come for me again. Let's move to our seventh story. The sun had long vanished behind the jagged peaks of the Appalachian Mountains when I first arrived in Black Hollow. The town was whispered about in the nearby communities, not for any historical significance or prosperity, but because people said the air itself carried a weight, a suffocating, almost tangible presence that seemed to seep into your skin and bone. I had been drawn there by a mixture of curiosity and skepticism, determined to document every abandoned street, every collapsed home, and every shadow that locals claimed moved of its own accord. They told me Black Hollow was cursed, and that those who stayed too long never returned the same. From the moment I set foot on the cracked asphalt, the silence was deafening. Birds did not sing here. Insects did not chirp. The wind whispered, carrying faint, unintelligible murmurs through the skeletal remains of houses. My first instinct was to chalk it up to imagination, but then the feeling of being watched, hate, slow, crawling dread that seemed to follow me from street to street. The town wasn't just empty, it was aware. Every building, every abandoned storefront, every crooked fence line seemed to lean toward me, as though it had waited decades for my arrival. I found an old journal tucked beneath a loose floorboard in what appeared to have once been the general store. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, the ink faded but legible. The entries were erratic, half historical record, half personal confession. The writer spoke of shadows that consumed the mind, of voices in the walls, and of neighbors who disappeared overnight, leaving only whispered warnings behind. There were sketches, too horrific, childlike depictions of faceless figures looming in doorways, hands reaching through walls, and eyes that glowed without light. As I read, the unease in my chest tightened. I could feel something brushing it, the edge of my perception, as if the town itself were coaxing me to see what it wanted revealed. Days blurred together as I wandered deeper into Black Hollow. I began recording everything, not just for evidence, but to anchor myself to reality. I spoke into the camera, narrating my every move, my every unease. I noticed patterns. Certain houses seemed to breathe, exhaling cold drafts that carried faint echoes of laughter, crying, or whispering threats. Windows reflected images that weren't there when I looked directly. Shadows didn't fall naturally. They stretched, twisted, and sometimes moved against the light. I started to see glimpses of people, or what had once been people, at edge of vision, always vanishing when I tried to focus. One night, I awoke to a sound like glass scraping across stone. The journal had been lying on my cot, open to a page I didn't remember reading. The entries described a nightly procession of the taken, spirits dragged through the streets in chains, their faces blank, their eyes hollow. My own heartbeat thundered in my ears as I realized the journal now contained an entry I didn't write, my own name, followed by a series of disjointed observations that mirrored exactly what I had experienced that day. The town was writing me into its history, folding me into its curse. I tried to leave, but every road out of Black Hollow seemed to stretch endlessly, looping back into the town. The mountains themselves appeared to shift, obscuring paths that had been visible hours before. I became aware of a presence behind me, just outside the periphery of my vision. I never saw it fully, but the sensation of eyes tracing my every move became unbearable. At times, I heard whispers mimicking my own thoughts, murmuring fears I hadn't voiced aloud. Sleep offered no refuge. Dreams were filled with streets that turned impossibly, homes that morphed into labyrinths, and shadowy figures that beckoned silently. It was during one of these nights that I realized Black Hollow's curse was not simply haunting, it was contagious. The longer I stayed, the more the town seeped into me. I began to lose track of time, mistaking hours for minutes, and my recordings started to display anomalies I could not explain. Shadows appeared where none should exist, and I heard voices speaking through the camera's microphone, even when it was powered off. Sometimes, I would watch the playback and see myself standing in locations I didn't remember visiting, staring blankly at structures that weren't there. Despite the terror, I couldn't stop exploring. Each discovery, each whispered secret, drew me deeper into the town's history. I found letters hidden in attics, photographs of families long vanished, and carvings etched into doorframes warning of the hollow ones. Black Hollow seemed alive in a way that defied logic, feeding off curiosity, fear, and attention. I could feel it pulsating beneath the cracked roads, in the walls, and in the silent, watchful eyes of its empty houses. Weeks or, perhaps, months passed. I can't tell the difference anymore. I speak less to myself, and more to the camera, narrating events in a trembling voice that I barely recognize. My reflection in broken mirrors is wrong. My eyes seem hollower, my skin pale, and my movements stiff, as though the town has begun to shape me into its own image. Sometimes I catch glimpses of other figures in the reflections, people I don't know. Or perhaps people I used to know standing silently behind me. They never move when I turn, yet I can feel their gaze pressing against the back of my neck. There is no clear moment when I stopped being an observer. Black Hollow doesn't need to physically trap you. It's patient and subtle. It bends perception, manipulates memory, and lures the mind into complicity. I've become part of its narrative, a living entry in a town that feeds on fear, recording and remembering. Each journal entry, each camera clip, each whispered memory is stitched into its fabric, and now, I too am stitched in. Sometimes, I imagine a future where someone comes to Black Hollow, as I did, curious and unafraid. They will follow the streets, read the journals, and hear the whispers. And I will be there, just at the edge of their vision, a warning and a witness. Perhaps one day, they too will become part of the town, another name written in the margins. Another shadow moving silently in the periphery. Black Hollow is patient. Black Hollow is eternal. And as I speak into this camera, documenting the impossible, I know that leaving is no longer the question. The town has claimed me. It has shaped me. And it will continue to wait, to watch, to draw in the next curious soul who thinks they can witness without becoming part of the story. Even now, I catch myself speaking aloud to empty streets, my voice echoing back answers I didn't expect. Sometimes, I hear faint laughter or crying, drifting from the ruined houses, as though the town itself is communicating in a language I am only beginning to understand. I've started marking the walls with tally marks, counting days, or perhaps, counting the number of times the shadows have approached me. I'm not sure anymore. My hands shake constantly. My reflection in the broken mirrors shifting in ways that don't match my movements. The fog that always seems to hang over Black Hollow grows thicker at night, curling around corners and creeping along streets in unnatural ways, almost like it's alive. I've begun noticing symbols carved into the trees, graffiti-like etchings in buildings, and footprints that appear in mud where I know no one has walked. Each mark, each sign, whispers a story of those who came before, those who tried to leave, and those who failed. I realize I am both an observer and a participant. The town is writing me into its endless, terrifying chronicle. Sometimes, when I glance down alleys or through shattered windows, I see fleeting figures, children playing silently, men and women frozen mid-motion, faces distorted and unblinking. They vanish when I approach, leaving only a chill that seeps into my bones. The journal I found now seems almost like a companion, though its pages twist and change, showing entries I did not write, drawings I did not sketch, and predictions that chill me to the marrow. The town's grip on me is total. It has not merely captured my body, but my perception, my memory, my very sense of reality. I've begun talking to these figures in the reflections, the shadows that seem to move independently. Sometimes they respond, not in words, but in subtle gestures, head tilts, and faint smiles that unsettle me more than anything else. I am learning that Black Hollow does not just scare, it teaches, shapes, and consumes. It bends time and space, warps the mind, and feeds on the intrusion of the curious. And so, I continue walking these streets, narrating my descent, documenting my transformation. Every step, every sound, every whisper becomes both evidence and trap. I know that soon, if I am not already, I will be indistinguishable from the town itself. Another shadow among shadows. Another voice among whispers. Another cautionary tale, waiting for the next outsider to arrive. The realization brings both terror and a perverse comfort. Black Hollow is not just a place. It is a living entity, and I am now inseparable from it, forever a part of its story, forever a witness, a victim, and a voice echoing into the fog for those who dare enter. Let's move to our 8th story. Let me tell you about the place they call Whispering Pines. A town so small it barely registers on any map, and yet it lingers in the nightmares of anyone who dares speak its name aloud. The first time I heard about it, I thought it was just another ghost story, a rural myth, whispered by drunks and old-timers. But the strange letters I received convinced me otherwise. They were unsigned, the paper yellowed and frayed, the ink faded in places, as if someone had written them years ago and only now found the courage to send them. Each letter contained a single word, sometimes a name, sometimes a warning. Leave, they watch. Pinewood Hollow, repeated again and again, until the words became an obsession I couldn't shake. I knew I had to go there, to see for myself if the town was real, if the horrors hidden within it were true. The road to Whispering Pines was narrower than I expected, flanked by thick forests that seemed almost alive, their branches twisting together to block the sky. Every mile I drove, the air grew colder, and the radio signals went dead. When I finally arrived, the town was smaller than my imagination. Just a handful of decaying houses and a single dirt road that wound between them. At first it seemed deserted, as if time itself had abandoned this place. But then I heard it, a low whispering hum that seemed to drift through the pines like a voice carried by the wind. It wasn't language, not quite, but it felt deliberate, if the forest itself was trying to speak to me, to warn me, or perhaps lure me in. I parked my car and stepped onto the dirt road, feeling the crunch of leaves underfoot. The letters had mentioned the old inn at the edge of town, a place called the Hollow Pines, and I made my way there first. Its sign swayed slightly, though there was no wind, and the building sagged under its own weight. The door was unlocked, creaking open to reveal a lobby covered in dust, the air thick with the smell of mildew, and something else I couldn't identify. The furniture was old, the wallpaper peeling in long curling strips, and yet the place felt inhabited. I could sense movement, subtle shifts in shadow, even though I saw no one. That first night, in Whispering Pines, sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard faint footsteps in the hall outside my room, whispers that grew louder and more insistent. I tried to convince myself it was imagination, stress from the long drive, the eerie quiet, but then I saw the writing on the walls, faint scratches that formed words, glowing faintly in the dim light. We know you're here. Stay with us, forever. My heart pounded so violently, I feared it might give me away, as if the town itself could hear it. I stayed awake until dawn, clutching the letters and muttering them to myself like a mantra. Morning brought no comfort. The town seemed even more oppressive in daylight, the shadows deeper, more angular. I wandered, trying to map the streets and find any signs of life, but everything was strangely wrong. Doors led nowhere, windows reflected rooms that did not exist, and the trees in the forest shifted subtly when I looked away, changing position, creating paths I hadn't seen moments before. I found a small cemetery at the edge of town, gravestones weathered and broken, some bearing names I had seen in the letters. As I ran my fingers over the rough stone, a whispering rose around me, urgent and suffocating. Don't leave. It seemed to say, you belong here. Over the next few days, I became entangled in the town's rhythm. Nights were worst, filled with whispers, footsteps, and fleeting shadows just beyond vision. By day, I explored the houses, documenting what I found: journals, photographs, objects that had clearly belonged to residents long gone, yet still seemed freshly used. One diary belonged to a man named Elias, who described living in Whispering Pines decades ago, writing of the whispers, the shadows, and the terrible pull the town exerted over him. He claimed he had tried to leave, but always ended up back on the same road, as if the town had a way of bending space and time to trap him. Reading his words sent a chill down my spine because they mirrored my own experiences. The people, whatever inhabited Whispering Pines, were subtle but pervasive. Shadows moved with intent, rearranging furniture when I wasn't looking. I occasionally glimpsed figures at the edge of my vision. Children in tattered clothing, faces pale and expressionless, staring with hollow eyes. Sometimes, I would hear laughter echoing through the trees, soft and melodic, almost inviting, until it twisted into something cruel, mocking. I tried talking to the figures, asking questions, pleading for answers, but they remained silent, only watching, waiting. The more I resisted, the more insistent the town became. Pressing against my mind like water through a sieve, it wasn't long before I realized the letters were not a warning but an invitation. They had been sent specifically to me, guiding me here, shaping my perception, eroding my resistance. The whispers spoke directly to my thoughts, filling me with fear and curiosity in equal measure. I began to see faces in the forest, those who had come before, trapped like me, their forms twisted by time and the town's influence. Sometimes I heard them calling my name, faintly at first, then louder, more urgent, until I could barely distinguish my own voice from theirs. Food, water, and sleep became secondary concerns. I wandered further, discovering a small chapel at the heart of the town, its interior dark and foreboding. Stained glass windows depicted twisted, impossible scenes. Figures with extra limbs. Faces melting into trees. Townspeople kneeling before something unseen. The air inside was thick, suffocating, and a low hum vibrated through the floorboards. I could feel the presence of something immense, something patient and eternal, watching me, evaluating me. I knew then that Whispering Pines was like a forest, not like an animal, but like a mind, vast and ancient, feeding on the attention and fear of those who entered. Time became meaningless. Days, nights, weeks all blended into one long, endless moment. I kept notes in a small journal I had brought, but the words often shifted. Letters rearranging themselves, sentences forming thoughts I did not write. I realized the town was trying to communicate, or perhaps manipulate me, encoding instructions, warnings, and riddles in my own handwriting. Sometimes I would read passages I did not recognize, describing events I had yet to experience, moments of terror that would unfold exactly as written. My mind began fracturing under the constant pressure of Whispering Pines' presence. I could no longer trust my senses. Sounds appeared where there was silence. Shadows moved against the light, and I often caught glimpses of myself in reflections, but not quite myself. The reflection would linger, smile, or frown, mimicking movements. Before I made them, always watching, always judging. I became obsessed with understanding the rules of the town, trying to map its distortions. But each attempt only drew me deeper into its labyrinth. At some point, I stopped trying to leave. The road out seemed to vanish, replaced by endless trees and twisting dirt paths. I understood that leaving was impossible, that Whispering Pines did not allow escape. Acceptance was the only path, but it came with its own terror, becoming part of the town itself. I started seeing glimpses of previous visitors, pale and distorted, moving silently among the shadows, whispering in a language I was slowly beginning to understand. And then the realization hit me fully. The letters, the whispers, the shadows, they were all waiting for someone new. My presence had been a signal, a beacon. Now that I was here, trapped and observing, I understood my role: to watch, to guide, to continue the chain. The town does not kill, it recruits. It transforms. It assimilates. I was no longer a visitor. I was an extension of Whispering Pines. A voice in the shadows, a watcher in the pines. Every morning, I now write letters like the ones that brought me here, sending them to strangers, carefully crafting the words to lure the next curious soul. The whispers guide my hand, shaping each sentence to perfection, ensuring that the cycle continues. I feel the presence of Elias and countless others in the trees, in the shadows, in the whispers. Together, we wait, patient and eternal, for the next visitor to wander too close, for the town to claim another soul, and for Whispering Pines to grow ever more alive with those who cannot resist its call. Let's move to our 9th story. The wind had been unusually sharp that evening, slicing through the empty hollows of Appalachia with a biting insistence. I had taken a detour off the main road, chasing the rumor of a ghost town few dared to approach, a place locals whispered about in hushed tones over flickering campfires. The sky above bled deep shades of violet and indigo as I approached the outskirts, where skeletal trees clawed at the air and the first remnants of derelict buildings began to emerge from the undergrowth. My headlights fell on the rusted remains of a sign, its letters mostly gone. But the word haven lingered faintly, though it was clear that the place had long since become anything but a refuge. The moment I stepped from my car, the air changed. It was heavier, laden with a damp rot that seemed to cling to my skin. The silence was immediate and complete, broken only by the occasional groan of a shifting branch. I tried to shake off the unease, chalking it up to the isolation. But there was something unnervingly deliberate about the way the shadows moved in the corners of my vision. Every step I took on the cracked, weed-strewn path felt amplified, echoing off the hollowed-out shells of former homes. It wasn't the wind rustling the broken shutters. It was as if the town itself breathed in response to my presence. Aware, waiting. I stumbled across the remnants of a town square, the cobblestones, cracked and uneven, littered with debris that hinted at lives abruptly abandoned. Rusting bicycles leaned against fractured lampposts, and the faint outline of a fountain, long dry, seemed to watch me with a hollow, accusing emptiness. My curiosity pressed me forward, urging me to explore further, despite the gnawing fear that something unseen tracked my every move. Then came the sound, a low guttural hum that resonated from beneath the cracked earth. At first I thought it was the wind, but the tone was too purposeful, too consistent. I froze, heart hammering, and tried to convince myself I had imagined it, until a faint whisper brushed against my ear. "Welcome home." I spun around, but the square was empty. No one was there, yet the whisper persisted, faint and distant, as if traveling through the cracks in the ground, bouncing off the decaying walls. The houses lining the square were all intact in shape but hollowed, dark mouths with broken teeth of window panes staring back at me. The air grew colder with each step I took, and the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, tugging at the corners of my vision. My pulse quickened as I realized I could not see a single living thing, yet I felt surrounded, watched by eyes I could not find. The hum beneath my feet grew louder, vibrating through the soles of my shoes, threading into my bones, until I felt I was no longer walking on earth but on something ancient and alive. Drawn forward, I entered what remained of a town hall. The doors protested with creaking hinges, echoing through the cavernous interior. Dust motes swirled in the meager light of my flashlight, forming phantom shapes that vanished as soon as I tried to focus. The air smelled of mildew and something metallic like blood, long dried into the wood. On a table in the center of the room lay an old ledger, its pages yellowed and scrawled with names. I leaned closer, feeling a chill crawl up my spine. Each entry corresponded to dates spanning decades, but the most recent ones, they were from last week. My name wasn't there yet, but the trembling in my hands made me realize it would not be long before it was. A sudden clatter from the corner of the room snapped my attention to a set of double doors, slightly ajar. I approached, hesitant, and peered inside. The space beyond seemed like a library, or perhaps a records room, but it was empty. Yet shadows gathered in the corners, and the whispers multiplied, layering one over the other, until the words became a cacophony I could not decipher. The ledger in my hand trembled, flipping its pages as if guided by invisible fingers. And then I saw an entry in fresh ink, smudged as though written in haste, dated that very day. "He arrives tonight." My skin crawled, a paralyzing fear rooting me in place. Panic surged, but something primal urged me to continue, to understand what bound this town and its abandoned souls. I felt compelled to walk deeper into the building, where the temperature dropped sharply, frost forming along the window edges, despite the season. The walls themselves seemed to pulse, subtly shifting, breathing in time with my racing heart. The whispers became a chant, coherent enough to discern fragments. "You belong. You belong. You belong." It was not my imagination. The town was alive, and it recognized me as the next thread in its tapestry. Stepping back into the square, I realized the town had transformed in the brief moments I had been inside. Paths I had walked before now twisted in impossible ways. Doors and windows appeared where none had existed, and the trees seemed to lean closer, their branches almost grasping at my clothing. The hum beneath my feet was no longer beneath, was everywhere, in the air, in the walls, in my chest. The ground felt soft, almost like walking on spongy flesh, and every step carried me further from the road, and further into the towns, waiting in brace. I tried to retrace my path, desperate to escape, but the streets had changed, weaving into labyrinthine patterns. Familiar landmarks twisted into grotesque mockeries of themselves. A fountain now gurgled black water, and faint reflections danced in its surface visions of people I had never seen. Faces twisted in eternal torment, calling out without sound. The whispers became clearer. Join us. Stay with us. My body moved against my will, drawn inexorably toward the center of the town where a looming church spire pierced the sky. The church doors opened as if welcoming me, and inside I found rows of empty pews. Candles flickered along the aisles, though no wind blew. At the altar, a shadowy figure knelt, head bowed, murmuring incantations I could not understand. The figure lifted its head slowly, revealing hollow eyes that mirrored my own, and a smile that was impossibly wide. It gestured to the front pew, inviting me to sit. And I realized with horror that the whispers were coming not from the town, but from me, from within my own mind. I had become the conduit for the town's voice, the living mouthpiece for its insatiable hunger. Fear gave way to a sick fascination, a perverse curiosity. I sat, powerless, as the shadow recited the town's history, its tragedies, its rituals, and its endless cycle of drawing outsiders in. Each story felt real, immediate, and horrifyingly intimate. I understood then that the town did not simply consume people, assimilated them, integrating their fear, their memories, and their identities into its own consciousness. My sense of self began to blur, replaced by an overwhelming awareness of the town's perspective. I was no longer just a visitor. I was part of Haven, a node in its network, a whisperer for those yet to come, hours, or perhaps days, past I could no longer tell. Time lost all meaning as the town wove me into its fabric. Every sound, every flicker of candlelight, every groan of the floorboards reinforced the reality that I could not leave. I was bound, a permanent observer and participant, destined to lure the next curious soul. Outside, the wind continued its relentless bite, carrying my voice, my letter, my warning or invitation into the world beyond, ensuring that the cycle would persist. And as I watched the shadows deepen and shift, I felt the terrible comfort of inevitability. Haven was patient, eternal, and now, so was I. Let's move to our 10th story. The sun had long dipped below the jagged Appalachian ridges, leaving the valley in a dense, oppressive darkness. I had been driving along the winding backroads for hours, chasing whispers of a town that locals refused to name aloud, a place where the past seemed to linger, like a bad odor you could never shake. The air had grown thick with mist, clinging to the edges of the trees and curling around the edges of my windshield, as if alive. As I turned a sharp bend, the faint outline of broken rooftops and collapsing structures emerged from the fog, and I knew, without seeing a single street sign, that I had found the town. It didn't feel abandoned, it felt waiting. Every step I took on the cracked, weed-strewn streets sent echoes bouncing off the skeletal walls of homes that had long surrendered to decay. The silence was profound, not the gentle hush of a quiet evening, but the heavy, suffocating absence of sound, as if the air itself had been drained of life. Rusted vehicles lay scattered in front yards, their windows shattered, their interiors colonized by moss and rot. The faint smell of mildew, mixed with something acrid burnt, metallic that made my stomach churn. A lone swing in what had once been a playground creaked softly in the wind, but there was no wind. My pulse quickened, each beat hammering in. My ears and I realized I was not entirely alone. From the shadows, I heard soft footsteps echo behind me, uneven and tentative, but whenever I turned, the streets lay empty. The fog thickened, swirling around my ankles like fingers trying to pull me in. I pressed on, my flashlight cutting through the gray haze, revealing twisted shapes of furniture, remnants of lives that had vanished long ago, scattered across the floor of a half-collapsed house. In one room, a rocking chair moved on its own, rocking slowly back and forth, despite the stillness around it. My stomach tightened, a cold dread settling in my chest, but curiosity propelled me further into the heart of the town. I stumbled across a dilapidated church at the center of town, its steeple, once tall and proud, now leaned dangerously, threatening to collapse with the slightest disturbance. The doors hung crooked on their hinges, and the wind or something else moaned through the cracks in the walls. Inside, the pews were coated in dust, yet the center aisle seemed freshly trampled, the marks of footprints pressed deep into the layer of decay. I could almost feel the presence of people who had long departed or perhaps had never truly left. I knelt to inspect the floorboards when a chill swept across the room, and a voice, barely audible, whispered directly into my ear, "You shouldn't be here." Every instinct screamed at me to run, yet I couldn't tear my eyes from the altar. On it lay a small box, carved from a dark, almost black wood, etched with symbols that seemed to shift when viewed from the corner of my eye. The moment I touched it, a pulse of cold ran through my body, and vision terrifying flashed behind my eyelids. Children laughing in a courtyard that no longer existed. Women crying silently in empty hallways. Men kneeling in supplication to entities I could not comprehend. The town's history flooded me at once, a torrent of memories not my own, searing and vivid, binding me to the cursed ground beneath my feet. I stumbled backward, gasping, and the church seemed to warp around me. Walls stretched impossibly, pews multiplied, and shadows writhed in corners where none had existed moments before. The voice returned, louder this time, chanting words I couldn't understand, but which filled my mind with dread. Outside, the fog thickened to an impenetrable wall, swallowing the streets, the houses, the very light of my flashlight. I was trapped, the town itself reshaping its boundaries, bending reality to ensnare me. Every attempt to flee led me back, to the same church doors, the same altar, the same dark box waiting for my touch. Hours or, perhaps, days passed in a haze of terror. I became aware of figures in the fog, shadowed silhouettes that mirrored my every movement, whispering, watching, waiting. My reflection appeared in broken windows, though it was not quite mine, pale, hollow-eyed, lips moving in silent repetition of the words I had heard in the church. The town had absorbed my fear, my life, my very essence, weaving it into the fabric of its malevolence. And just when I thought I might succumb entirely, the box on the altar clicked open of its own accord. Inside lay a small, folded letter, scrawled in handwriting I recognized as mine, but I had never written it. The words were a warning and an invitation, both. You will not leave. Neither will they. Welcome to Evershade. The sun never rose. Time lost meaning. Every sound was amplified: footsteps, whispers, the groan of collapsing wood, the faint heartbeat of the town itself, and the fog continued to twist and surge, enclosing me, pulling me deeper. I could no longer tell where the town ended, and I began. The streets twisted endlessly, doors appeared where none had been, and the hollow silhouettes followed me, never speaking but always close. I understood then that Evershade did not just trap its victims. It reshaped them, made them part of its consciousness. My thoughts were no longer my own. They were an echo of the town, a thread in its endless web of despair. The final realization came quietly, but with absolute clarity. There was no escaping Evershade. It would wait for the next traveler, the next curious soul, drawn by rumors, by whispers, by the natural human desire to uncover the unknown. And when they arrived, I would be waiting not as myself, not as the man who entered the valley, but as the town's voice, its eyes, its hand guiding the curious into the folds of its shadowy embrace. The box remained open on the altar, the letter inside fluttering as if in a breeze I could not feel. Outside, the wind carried my warning to the world beyond, ensuring the cycle would continue. The sun never rose. I never left. Evershade endured, eternal, patient, and hungry, and now, so was I. Let's move to our 11th story. The first time I heard about Crow Hollow, it was from an old-timer at a roadside diner who leaned close and whispered, "Some towns are better left forgotten." He spoke of a place deep in the Appalachians, hidden from maps and GPS, where the trees grew unnaturally tall, and the fog never lifted. I was drawn in immediately, the kind of curiosity that gnaws at your chest and keeps you awake at night. I decided to find it, to see for myself if the rumors were true. The drive was longer than I expected. Twisting roads, snaking between jagged cliffs and dense forests, sunlight barely piercing the canopy. By the time I arrived, the sky was a bruised purple, and a heavy silence had settled over the land, pressing against my ears. The town appeared suddenly, as though the forest itself had exhaled to reveal it. Buildings crouched behind thick vines and moss, some tilting at impossible angles, others reduced to mere skeletons of wood and stone. A chill that had nothing to do with the evening air wrapped around me. I stepped cautiously onto the cracked main street, my boots crunching on broken glass and scattered debris. It felt alive, but not in the way of a living town. It was alive in the sense that it was aware of me, watching my movements, gauging my intentions. I had to remind myself to breathe, to keep my wits about me. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet my curiosity anchored me in place. At the center of Crow Hollow stood what remained of the town hall, a once grand building now draped in rotting banners and shrouded in creeping fog. I pushed the heavy doors open, and a blast of cold air rushed past me, carrying the faint, unmistakable stench of decay and something far fouler, metallic and coppery, like blood long dried. The interior was a mess of overturned chairs, splintered wood, and yellowed papers that crumbled at the touch. Yet in the midst of the chaos, I saw them, small handprints on the walls, smeared in a dark substance that refused to be identified, each one impossibly small, yet disturbingly detailed, as if etched by children who had lived here decades ago. A sense of foreboding settled deep in my stomach, an unshakable knowledge that I was not alone. I followed the handprints out of the hall and into the alleys behind the main street. Shadows clung unnaturally to the walls, twisting and stretching, as if the town itself were alive, warping light to deceive my senses. Every sound, the scrape of a branch, the whisper of the wind seemed amplified, carrying intention. Almost voices calling my name in tones I couldn't comprehend. Then I saw them, small figures darting between the wreckage, glimpses of pale faces and wide, hollow eyes. I blinked, and they were gone, leaving only the eerie impression that they had been watching, learning, judging. My pulse hammered against my ribs, but some perverse fascination kept me moving deeper into Crow Hollow, in the center of an abandoned park. A decaying merry-go-round creaked on its own, slowly turning, as though guided by invisible hands. The figures appeared again, standing around it, their eyes fixed on me with an intensity that pierced through every rational thought. I wanted to run, but my legs refused to obey. They were rooted in fear, curiosity, and a sense of inevitability. And then, I heard it. Laughter high-pitched and unrelenting, echoing off the skeletal trees. It wasn't playful, was mocking, sinister. A sound designed to erode sanity. My heart thumped so violently, I feared it might burst. I backed away, but the ground beneath me shifted, and suddenly I was not on solid earth, but standing on something softer, something that seemed to move beneath my feet. Panic surged, and I scrambled to escape, but every turn brought me back to the same park. The same figures, the same unbearable laughter. The town had trapped me, warped reality around me like a web. And the children, if they were children, watched, whispering incomprehensible phrases that burrowed into my mind. I realized then that Crow Hollow had its own memory, its own consciousness, and I had trespassed into its domain. It wasn't the buildings that were dangerous, nor the fog, nor even the shadows. It was the town itself, an entity that fed on fear, curiosity, and the souls of those who dared explore too far. Hours or, perhaps, minutes. I could no longer tell, passed in a haze of disorientation. The children's whispers grew louder, forming words I could almost understand, names, demands, threats. I felt an invisible grip tightening around my chest, forcing me to kneel on the wet, soft ground. The merry-go-round spun faster, blurring into a vortex of grotesque colors and shapes. And then I saw it. A doorway carved into the trunk of an enormous tree, dark, gaping, and pulsating, as if it breathed. The children gestured toward it, beckoning me, and a horrifying thought struck me. I was not being invited to leave, I was being drawn into the heart of the town itself. Every fiber of my being screamed to resist, yet I found myself stepping closer. Inside the tree, the air was thick, suffocating, filled with whispers and the faint scent of rot. Shapes moved just beyond vision, forms twisting in impossible angles, reaching for me, brushing against my skin with icy fingers. I realized that the town was alive, and I was not an intruder, I was prey. And in that instant, I understood the truth of Crow Hollow. It did not want to be found by accident. It wanted witnesses, chroniclers, souls who would feed its existence, stories that would continue the cycle of terror. I was no longer just an explorer. I was part of its history, its next chapter. The doorway spit me out into a clearing, where the town stretched endlessly, houses forming impossible geometries, alleys twisting back onto themselves, streets folding in ways that defied logic. The children appeared, circling me, whispering in a chorus that made my brain ache. I stumbled and fell, and when I looked up, their faces were blank, their eyes dark voids. The fog thickened, swallowing the town, the trees, and even the sky above, leaving me in a world where time had no meaning. Crow Hollow had claimed me. My senses dulled, my thoughts no longer my own, my body moving with a will that was not mine. The town had rewritten the rules, and I was trapped in its endless, cyclical nightmare. I could hear other voices, faint echoes from beyond the fog. Travelers who had stumbled upon Crow Hollow before me, each adding to the town's knowledge and malice. And in that instant, I understood the town's cruel design. It survived not by keeping people out, but by letting them in, feeding on their terror, their fascination, and their eventual surrender. I was no longer an observer. I was part of its machinery, a sentinel to ensnare the next curious soul. And as I wandered through streets that were at once familiar and impossible, I felt the weight of countless lost explorers pressing down, guiding my steps, whispering their warnings, and reminding me that escape was never an option. Crow Hollow endured, eternal, a living nightmare carved into the heart of Appalachia, and I had become one of its eternal witnesses. Let's move to our 12th story. It began with a letter that arrived on a rainy afternoon, its envelope yellowed and brittle, the handwriting jagged and uneven, as if the writer's hand had trembled from fear or urgency. I didn't know the sender, but the words inside were simple and haunting. Do not come to Ashgrove Hollow. You will not leave the same. I should have discarded it, shrugged it off as a prank, yet something about the tone, the quiet menace, that seeped through the paper kept me awake that night, heart hammering in the dim light of my apartment. One researched the town online and in old archives, but nothing concrete appeared. Ashgrove Hollow was barely a footnote in history books, a place that seemed to vanish when people tried to remember it. The curiosity that had always driven me to explore the abandoned, the forgotten, now gnawed at me relentlessly. The following morning, I found myself driving down narrow, rain-slicked roads, guided by the vague directions scribbled in the letter. Trees arched overhead, heavy with water, their branches creating dark tunnels that swallowed the sky. The further I went, the more the world seemed to quiet itself, the usual hum of cars and life fading until only the sound of rain on the windshield remained. A sense of unease settled over me, the type that presses at your chest and tells you that turning back would be impossible, not because it was unsafe, but because the town had already decided I would see it. Ashgrove Hollow appeared without warning. The buildings were blackened with age, their wooden siding warped and splintered. Windows gaped open like empty eyes, and the streets were overgrown with grass and weeds. Cracked asphalt barely visible beneath layers of neglect. A mist hung low, seeping from the ground itself, curling around street lamps and doorframes, giving the illusion that the town breathed. The air was thick, damp, and carried the faint, nauseating temps of decay. Every instinct screamed to leave, but my curiosity rooted me in place. I stepped cautiously onto the main street, noting the absence of life, the unnatural silence that seemed to hum with unseen energy. I wandered between the dilapidated houses, each one telling its own story of abandonment and despair. Some doors were ajar, revealing dark interiors with furniture coated in dust and mildew. Others were sealed shut, the wood warped, and nails rusted through time. On the walls, I noticed strange markings, etched symbols that seemed older than the town itself, patterns that pulsed faintly in the corner of my vision. My chest tightened as I realized the town wasn't just abandoned, was aware, and it had left these signs intentionally, as if it had been expecting me. The shadows shifted in ways that defied logic. and I felt eyes watching from every broken window. Every crevice, in the center of the town, stood what remained of the old chapel. Its steeple, leaning dangerously, stained glass shattered. As I approached, a low hum began, vibrating through the ground and my bones. It wasn't a sound in the conventional sense. It was a presence, resonating with a malevolence that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. Inside, the pews were overturned, and the pulpit bore deep gouges, as if claws had raked across its surface. At the altar, a strange object lay, a small, carved box of dark wood, etched with symbols matching those outside. I reached out, drawn by some force I couldn't resist, and the moment my fingers brushed the surface, a wave of visions hit me. I saw people, generations past, their faces twisted in terror, screaming silently as shadowy forms dragged them into the walls, the floors, the very foundation of the chapel. Ashgrove Hollow wasn't just a place. It was a trap, a living entity, that consumed the souls of anyone who trespassed. I stumbled back, but the visions lingered, invading my thoughts and forcing my feet forward. Outside, the mist thickened, forming shapes that weren't human, stretching and slithering across the town like living smoke. I tried to run, but the streets seemed to loop endlessly, alleys folding back upon themselves. The town was a maze, designed to disorient and claim. Every turn brought me back to the chapel, to the box, and to the oppressive awareness that Ashgrove Hollow was feeding on my fear, growing stronger with every heartbeat. I realized then that leaving was not just difficult, it was impossible. The town had anticipated my arrival, and it had woven me into its history before I even crossed the first threshold. Hours, days, or perhaps weeks passed. I could not tell, my sense of time unraveling as the town's presence pressed against me. Whispers echoed from empty houses, calling my name, recounting scenes I had never committed, fears I had never voiced. Shadows lengthened and thickened, forming hands, faces, and shapes that reached toward me with a slow, deliberate patience. I understood that the town had memory, intelligence, and malice, and that it used the very landscape to manipulate and trap its victims. I could feel myself fraying, mind-bending under the weight of endless corridors, impossible architecture, and the oppressive watch of Ashgrove Hollow itself. By what I think was the fourth night, I found a small journal tucked into the chapel's pulpit. Its pages were filled with accounts of those who had arrived before me, their handwriting frantic and deteriorating, their words echoing the letter I had received. Do not come here. Do not breathe. The town knows your name. It will remember your face. The final entry was just a series of scratches, an incoherent attempt to describe the town's hunger, the inevitability of being claimed. I realized I was reading the chronicles of countless lost souls, trapped in the town's labyrinthian embrace, each one a cautionary tale that had failed to prevent the next visitor. The town's power was cumulative, each soul adding weight to its malice, and now I was part of that accumulation, my mind already tethered to its rhythms. The mist swirled around me, forming thick walls that blocked any attempt at escape. I ran, stumbling through streets that twisted unnaturally, alleys folding into themselves, doors leading back into rooms I had already left. The town seemed infinite, a recursive nightmare stretching beyond reason. Shapes coalesced in the fog, humanoid, figures with faceless heads, their limbs elongated, fingers reaching for me with silent intent. They were not alive in a traditional sense, yet they moved with purpose, agents of the town, embodiments of its will. Every scream, every heartbeat, every thought I had was absorbed, feeding Ashgrove Hollow and ensuring that my presence, my fear, would become part of its essence. And then I understood the cruel design of Ashgrove Hollow. It didn't need to kill immediately. It trapped, it fed, it twisted perception until the mind itself became a prison. Days might pass as seconds, memories warped into illusions. I felt my identity fracturing, pieces of myself slipping into the town's consciousness, my thoughts, no longer private, my will bending toward the entity that had claimed me. I tried to scream, but no sound emerged. The town had stolen even my voice, replacing it with a whispering echo that only it could hear. I was aware of everything, yet utterly powerless, a pawn in a game I had never agreed to play. By what I can only describe as an eternity, I wandered the streets, following paths that circled endlessly, seeing glimpses of past visitors in the fog. Twisted and distorted, their fear still palpable. The box in the chapel remained, pulsing with a dark energy. A beacon that drew new victims as surely as a flame attracts moths. I realized then that Ashgrove Hollow was patient, eternal, and Cruellit did not hunger for destruction alone, but for participation. For witnesses who would expand its reach and maintain its existence. And I, now a part of it, understood the hopeless truth. Once you arrive, once the town knows your name, you belong to it forever, an eternal observer in its living nightmare. Destined to watch and wait for the next unwitting soul to stumble into its grasp.